you check the children? Show a little match sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes. That is what
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Well, hello there, Fright fans, and welcome back to the Horror Show. I'm Jaime and Fuego, and returning with some more coverage out of Fantastic Fest 2025. We had the awesome opportunity. A big shout out to Brad for getting us approved as virtual press so that, you know, even though we couldn't be there in Austin, we are here in the Deadly Desert, and I got the chance to see somewhere around 20-ish films, and some of them are going to be, you know, here. Some were reviewed by Cecil and like Davey and Robert and the rest of the gang, and then there's other non-horror stuff that is going to be featured on my personal channel in Fuegotainment. But this is a film that is coming at us from Spectre Vision, which is Elijah Wood's company, dealing with much more just off-of-center genre sort of stuff. Much more inventive, not your typical like run-of-the-mill schlock that you see a lot of other, and that's not to knock any of that stuff because I love a lot of the by-the-numbers stuff too, but, you know, definitely much more unique in a lot of stuff that, you know, that Spectre Vision, you know, in general, acquires and distributes and everything like that. And so this is coming at us from Norwegian writer-director, I believe it's Patrick Siversen. Yep, I just wanted to make sure that I got that correctly. And so, yeah, this is definitely auteur in its appearance, being a black and white film. There is a few flourishes of color here and there. But, yeah, slow burn, much more on the dramatic side. It does definitely hit some very horrific sort of subject matter when it comes to family tragedy, attempts at taking one's own life, things of that nature. And then, yes, we do, you know, it is, at the end of the day, a, like, horrific thriller in the subject matter that it does eventually veer into as well. But this is a non-spoiler review, so I just want to preface it as that. I believe this made its premiere at Fantastic Fest in Dawning. So it's entitled Dawning. Demring is, I'm assuming, the Norwegian language original title. But, yeah, so Dawning, we always like to give overall thoughts, and then we segue briefly into story and acting and effects and, you know, things of that nature. But, yeah, so overall impressions of this, you know, it definitely starts out slow, and I think that it is much more a drama, and even more so than like a thriller or even like, you know, full-on horror or anything of that nature. And yet I appreciate that melding because of the fact that a lot of the time when you lay the groundwork and you have that intensive character development like you have with this film, with these three sisters, I believe it's the middle sister who is the one that had made a second attempt on her life. That is kind of the inciting incident that gets the ball rolling in this film. But then you also have the differing plight of the older and younger sister. You have some flashbacks that give some additional like familial dynamic context and stuff like that. So it is a drama first and foremost, but it brings in enough thriller sort of vibes and then terrific sort of subject matter, as I mentioned at the beginning. So the acting is very, very strong. It may be a little too slow burn for some people, but I really like that sort of I hate to just throw around the term auteur, but this is most definitely not going for low-hanging fruit, lowest common denominator, especially with some of the discussion that happens in one particular flashback with regards to the essence of like multiverse and other dimensions and stuff. And I know that, you know, Marvel has beaten the whole multiverse idea like a red-headed dead horse to this particular point. But I always think back to like some of the earlier Stephen King stuff, you know, all the Dark Tower business that was tying in different, you know, variations of dimensions and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, this is about the dramatic dynamic of these three sisters, and especially, and I'll get to this when I am rounding out the review with like production design and, you know, editing and things of that nature, but it is very much an analysis, not just of the, you know, interplay between these three grown women, but also their mother, because something that happens with their mother early in the film is another big linchpin for kind of keeping certain things secret, and then also just how their upbringing and just how their mother treated all three of them in slightly different ways, but also with a lot of kind of carryover as well. So overall thoughts, you know, this one will not be for everybody because it is a little bit like it takes its time to develop and to really get to any sort of horror and thriller sort of stuff, and then it almost like kind of, once it dips its toe, backpedals a little bit without getting into too much spoilery detail. But, you know, I was impressed with it very, very much so from a dramatic standpoint. Those who are really craving carnage candy, you're not really going to get too much here until it, like, really ramps up as we get later into the film. But, yeah, lo and behold, I was quite impressed with this, but much more so as a tense drama and a character study than as like a horror thriller, if that makes sense. And that's not a slight on the movie. That is just my impressions of the sort of writing that Patrick was going for. And so story, as I've kind of dipped my toe into a little bit as well. So a middle sister, and I'm just trying to remember her name. I believe it's Christine. So Christine has just had a second suicide attempt. Yeah, without getting into too many specifics. Basically be unsuccessful. I don't recall, since it's been a couple days since I watched it, if there is mention of whether somebody found her and then rushed her in, or if she just didn't quite do it right or whatever, and so was unsuccessful, or if there was a, kind of, I don't know, somebody who intervened and saved her, so to speak. But long story short, they are at, her and her older and younger sister are at this family cabin, which is out in this remote area, obviously. And so her older sister's husband is along. I believe it's the older sister. And then the younger sister, she has kind of a on-again, off-again dude that she's in kind of an open relationship with that we actually get to meet in a flashback, which is one of the more thought-provoking but yet also lighthearted scenes in the movie. One of the few where we actually get full-blown color. So everything that is taking place in the here and then, yeah, it's all in that kind of dreary, dirgy sort of black and white. But I'll get into that once I'm rounding things out with, production and editing and effects and everything. But yeah, so there is a bit of news that is family related that comes when they are just arriving at the cabin. And it's something that in Christine's kind of frail state, the older and younger sister, they're not sure if they want to actually divulge this to her because they're not really certain how it may just like push her back over the edge or whatever. I mean, she's in like a very delicate sort of state after just, coming out of another suicide attempt. And so they're trying to delicately approach this as opposed to breaking the news to Christine and just like, like a sack of bricks to the back of the head, so to speak. But I mean, it's really kind of all that I can mention without so it does develop into something, beyond just, I guess, sisterly bickering, but you do early on have a lot of that, and that's where certain people maybe, if you're expecting something more of the thriller horror variety, I guess I would just implore patience, because it does eventually get there, and it is rather harrowing and life death in sort of intensity. I'm just kind of walking on eggshells here, trying not to divulge too much because it is really good. Now the one thing that I will say, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but it is something that I always find a little bit of an irritant, because my favorite author, Stephen King, also likes to do this too. There is a moment in the second act where a really big, important plot development that happens later on is divulged by the narrator, and it's pretty big-time stuff. And Stephen King is notorious for this as well, where he'll say, such and such and such with a character, and then such and such, and you can tell I'm trying to be very, very, very careful with how I'm going about this. But yeah, just it's like it's almost like a spoilery reveal long before it actually happens in the movie. I have never understood the conceit of this. It does happen in the movie, and so that was my one deterrent that I can think of. My one major deterrent, I guess, because I would have really liked to have been kind of just wrapped in suspension and suspense and just like kind of wondering, questioning, as opposed to having all the cards laid out for me, in the middle of the movie, as opposed to seeing how it's all going to pan out later on, as far as, the certain goings on with characters and whatever. So, but the acting is top notch. Top freaking notch, man, and I will silence that down. But yeah, acting is really great across the board. I always kind of poke fun at a lot of our American genre actors because of the fact that I am just so wowed in comparison a lot of the time with actors that I see from Europe especially. But yeah, I mean, all three sisters are great. They really do that balancing act of quarreling and yet still loving each other. Like, there is one fight where F-bombs are dropped, middle fingers, all this other stuff. Christine is pissed about something. And then, you know, a scene or two later, you know, she's out smoking a cigarette and the youngest sister comes and, you know, grabs and takes a few drags. And, you know, Christine is like, she's apologizing. She knows she was in the wrong, but she also admits that, you know, she's in this frantic sort of trying to process everything after almost dying, you know, almost killing herself. And so, but yeah, the three sisters are especially strong in their performances here. There are some men in this film, obviously, the oldest sister's husband, the youngest sister's boyfriend. There's also a nearby farmer who plays into stuff too. We don't get as much from him until like later in the movie, you know, once he, you know, comes to their cabin and everything. But yeah, I mean, there's no weak links, no missing links of any kind in the acting. It's all very stellar. Especially there's three different, almost like breaking the fourth wall, like almost like testimonials, like you would see, like, I'm gonna age myself, like on The Real World back in the day. I'm sure they do it on a lot of these other reality shows that I could give two drops of piss about. But so all three sisters have these moments where they are talking about their upbringing and their dynamic with their mother. And so, you know, I have not the most perfect relationship with my mother, unfortunately. I know it's always going to be different when it's daughters with mothers in comparison with sons and mothers, and, you know, all of the Oedipus analysis, or, you know, whatever sort of strained weirdness. And in any event, all three sisters have these testimonial sort of bits where they talk directly to the camera, almost as if they're being interviewed, and they're discussing their upbringing with their mother and how she was kind of like very loving at times, but then also neglectful at others. There's a story one of the sisters is recanting about breaking an arm and not getting taken to the hospital until like long after the family meal and all this other stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just, once again, back to the whole character study and analysis aspect of this. It's much more of a drama, but it really succeeds and strives as a drama, not just because of Patrick's writing, but also, you know, culminate that and combine it, you know, with these three sisters who are all stellar in their performances. But there is like a very unsettling and borderline chilling, especially the third and final, when we finally get Christine talking, because, you know, first I believe you get the older sister, then the younger sister, and then Christine, who is kind of our lead, you know, our final girlishness, although it's not really that kind of movie, without giving too many details or getting too spoilery. But yeah, as far as like the production design, the look of the film, I always love when you're dealing with this sort of very dour, saddening subject matter, when you decide to go with the black and white. And even more so when you sprinkle in color when times are better, and where it just signifies the fact that, okay, this is more of a lighthearted dinner debate discussion about multiverses and things of that nature. And you also get to see Christine with, it looks like a lover of hers, and you know, where she's just like in a better mental headspace in some flashbacks. So flashbacks, I love the use of color because of the fact that that was before things were quite as dire as they are in like the main proceedings, where everything is just this drawn out, gray, dreary sort of look and vibe to it. And then, I mean, as far as score goes, it's very minimalist. If anything, I mean, there's not really much to speak of in that. Now, there is particular sound design aspects when we see a particular event from a few different perspectives, and so that's where I love, not just from the sound aspect, but from the cinematography aspect, seeing like you get a drone for, you know, one perspective and more of an aerial kind of view, obviously, and then you get more of like an up close and personal sort of view for a big kind of turning point in the movie. And so you get and seeing certain things happen off screen, and that, or just hearing them happening off screen, although since you're seeing things from different perspectives, you know what is transpiring, and you just get the sound design of what's going down without spoiling things. This is where I really, even though the movie kind of spoils some things, you know, halfway through, as I mentioned, going in as blind as possible, I didn't even really remember the synopsis too well for Dawning, so I'm glad that I went in, you know, pretty fresh and pretty blind for it, because I was very impressed with this. You know, once again, Gorehounds, you'll probably be disappointed because it's not an abundance of it. This is much more that sort of rumination on familial dynamic, sister dynamic, and also how, you know, things can be strained with, you know, a parent, and how that can kind of bleed into other aspects of your life, no pun intended. And so, yeah, guys, that is my thoughts on Patrick Syversons, I want to say, I hope I'm remembering the name properly, Patrick, because you were kind enough to send me the screener of this for me to cover here on the horror show. So, you know, thank you so very much. You know, grande gracias, as I like to say here on the horror show. I've been Jaime and Fuego. Big thanks to Brad, who hooked us up with the virtual press and basically got us into contact with all of these different publicity rep people so that we could actually get access to stuff like Dawning. Greatly appreciate that. If you have seen this film during Fantastic Fest, or if you plan to see it in the future, it definitely needs to be on your radar. Being Spectreverse, I would imagine probably end up on Shudder. You know, maybe one of the other, like, I don't know, maybe a Prime or whatever. But from what I recall, Spectrevision, a lot of their stuff does end up, you know, on Shudder, you know, which works in conjunction with, you know, AMC, the cable channel and whatnot. So definitely one that for those who like a very hard-hitting slice of drama along with your horror thriller sort of vibes, big time recommend. And yeah, guys, thanks so very much for watching. You know, like, share, subscribe, all that jazz. And yes, also a big thanks to our patrons. So I've been Fuego, y'all have been Rad Status, and until I come back with a little bit more Fantastic Fest coverage, remember, my scarific homies, stay scared.